Aquí estamos. Somos la dignidad rebelde, el corazón olvidado de la patria.
An indigenous people's rebellion in Chiapas, Mexico, trade conferences, and a red Volkswagen bus. What do these things have in common? I'll try to draw some correlations in the next half hour if you'll bear with me. First, I'd like to introduce you to Francisco Coca.
Aquí hemos vivido por más de 300 años, aquí en el sur de Colorado y norte de Nuevo México. Mis antecesores de la sangre indígena, pues más de miles de años, yo creo.
Remember, if you will, a time not long ago.
Y estábamos aquí cuando pasaron en los 49 en el siglo pasado, en los 49 cuando iban el europeo para California sobre el oro, por aquí pasaron. Muchos pasaban con sus carguitas en la espalda y mi raza aquí, la chicanada, los mexicanos o como se quieran llamar, les ayudaron para que siguieran adelante.
Remember now, if you will, perhaps a bit more uncomfortably.
Y eso es lo que le puede a mí mucho, que nosotros ayudamos y luego han cambiado las leyes y estas leyes han sido leyes opresivas que han opresado a toda mi raza. Y es una discriminación y todo lo que hicimos nosotros, lo bueno, lo tomaron por mal. Porque nuestra caricia y nuestra buena voluntad lo tomaron por mal, como si fuéramos, diré mejor, por pendejos.
The Europeans repaid the kindness of their former hosts with the theft of their lands. The convenient term of manifest destiny was coined by one of these European immigrants and spread by the media of that time to justify this course of events. Now, if you'll continue to bear with me, skip ahead a few years to 1994. Clifford D. May, associate editor of the Rocky Mountain News, reasons that poor countries aren't ready for democracy but need market economies to produce prosperity first, and democracy may someday follow. One could here substitute the term manifest destiny for Clifford's market economy without too great of a stretch of the imagination, and reflect for a moment whether things have changed much. Just prior to 1994, these architects of NAFTA and the Clinton administration struck a deal with President Salinas of Mexico to alter the Mexican Constitution in order to make Mexico more exploitable. One of the key elements of these constitutional changes was the privatization of the communal Indian lands in Mexico so they could be bought by U.S. investors. The U.S. media failed to inform the public of these manipulations before, during, or after the passage of NAFTA. Perhaps there was more important news. The indigenous social and economic systems which existed were privately termed necessary sacrifices.
You know what I mean? You could always blame it on working out.
Primero de enero, año del 94.
NAFTA went into effect January 1st, 1994, and the Tzotzil, Seltal, Toholabal, Zoque, Mame, and Chol Indians, calling themselves Zapatistas after Emiliano Zapata, rose up in rebellion calling NAFTA a death sentence. Here we are, the dead of all time, dying once again, but this time with the objective of living. Again, the U.S. media neglected to inform the public that NAFTA and the privatization of Indian lands are contributing to the ongoing rebellion, saying only that leftist guerrillas in a remote state of Mexico rose up in rebellion for better living conditions. Join Hugo and me, Kerry Appel, in a trip into another world, a world where the indigenous people are still the majority. for the time being, in That's the last voyage to Chiapas of the Red Lightning for English-only speakers. December 1995, my 5th trip to Chiapas in 18 months, and the 3rd in my 1971 Volkswagen bus nicknamed the Relámpago Rojo, or Red Lightning, by the people in Chiapas. I always tried to follow the laws of Mexico on my trips, but the presence of foreigners in Chiapas who might observe human rights violations was awkward for Mexico, and I suspected something might happen to me on this trip, so I took some precautions. I called the Mexican consul in Denver and asked if I needed a special visa. No, he said, all you need is a tourist visa. I then gave my lawyer a letter listing my proposed activities, my conversation with the Mexican consul, and my suspicions regarding the Mexican government. Hugo, a college student from Denver, wanted to ride along with me to learn more about the country his parents had come from. Since Chiapas is at the bottom of Mexico, just above Guatemala, he was going to see a lot of it. When we crossed the border, we asked some Mexicans what they thought of the factories, or maquiladoras, that U.S. corporations were building there.
The maquiladoras are not giving the Mexico profit, or they're not, the products and all the money is all going to the North American empire.
By the time we got halfway through Mexico to Veracruz, we had already experienced what were to be routine requests.
For main few money, permitir el paso, usted.
Nope, no quiero pagar.
It's like, oh, he really wanted the money bad, but Kerry stood firmly with this position, and he got his press card back, and everything went well. After that,
on a beach, we met these Totonacas. I asked what the indigenous in the state of Veracruz thought of the Zapatistas and their charismatic spokesperson, Subcomandante Marcos.
Hola, los zapatistas, para mí, la entiendo yo que están pidiendo apoyo, o sea, un trabajo, ¿verdad? Para que haya más trabajo, más que haya trabajo, que haya libertad, que haya justicia, que haya apoyo tanto como el gobierno, tanto como nosotros, ¿verdad? Todo eso nos beneficia para todos, no nada más para uno solo, ¿verdad? Y no se trata de matarnos, de pelearlo con lo que sea, simplemente se está peleando la lucha, pues, en democracia, con democrática. Eso es lo que está haciendo para mí, así la entiendo.
In the city of Veracruz, these young women celebrating their quinceañeras gave us this message for Subcomandante Marcos.
Todos somos Marcos.
There you go.
but now we are in the northeastern part of Chiapas. We just entered.
Vamos a volar, vamos a la selva, la Candona.
En un lugar de la sierra, año del 94, San Cristóbal de las Casas y otros pueblos aledaños, los cuales fueron tomados por el comandante Marcos. Ejército Zapatista, Liberación Nacional. Derribaron varios puentes, acceso a ese lugar para evitar que pasara la defensa nacional. Tomaron como rey en Altamirano y a la selva la Candona se lo llevan secuestrado. También le echaron el guante al general Castellano.
We're actually here in Ocosingo, one of the places the Zapatistas took over. And as we're going along through this town, I see the military presence here. I just saw back there a little bit 3 or 4 army trucks with a good amount of soldiers. So that's where we're at right now. And that's where we're headed to San Cristobal de las Casas. That's it.
San Cristobal is right there. It says that way.
We see the in front of me. We see the penitentiary or the state prison of the where the EZLN liberated the people that were in that prison, and that was during the uprising last year of 1994. Right here, I see behind me, or straight ahead of me, I see military barracks. They seem to be hiding from the tourists. That's why they put up the wooden fence. Ready? Kerry, I wanted to tell you, Kerry, that the guy said that you couldn't use your camera back there.
What's that, Hugo?
He said you couldn't use your camera back there in the white van. One of the military guys, he goes,
Oh, I thought he was waving at me.
no, more military personnel. We're going down a hill named Del Extranjero, where North Americans operate and patrol a radar base. Voy on EZLN, San Cristobal de las Casas, Viva la Lucha. EZLN there, EZLN there. More and more. As we go along down the city, you know that this is an EZLN town. Going to Morelia, which is directly to here. We're gonna go give supplies to the kids and balloons and other supplies that we brought from Denver. We're gonna give them directly to them. So that's what we're gonna do, and that's our destination. So come with me and follow me, and we'll see what happens, how it goes.
Feliz Navidad. ¿Puedes decir Feliz Navidad?
Feliz Navidad y Augusto. Próspero año nuevo.
Feliz Navidad, Kerry. Feliz Navidad, Hugo. Feliz Navidad, Hugo.
Feliz Navidad. Feliz Navidad.
Okay.
Y feliz Navidad.
¿Viendo Cocingo? ¿Alguna actividad?
Okay.
¿Qué actividad tiene realizando ahorita?
Visitando.
Visitando.
Conociendo el estado, sí.
Already the poorest people in Mexico, the indigenous of Chiapas, have been under siege by the Mexican army for 2 years now and are unable to work or tend their crops. Let's drive now to an area where the unarmed Zapatistas are camped in compliance with the terms of the peace talks.
Bienvenidos a los Altos de Chiapas. Es territorio libre y no rebelde.
These are the people fighting for democracy and against the loss of their traditional lands. There is little sympathy from elected officials in the U.S. about the oppression they suffer. Senator Ben Nighthorse Campbell agrees that it is not so unlike what American Indians faced in the recent history of this nation. So what's he doing about it? Not much, apparently, and neither is anyone else in the U.S. government. According to Jack Broderick, one of Campbell's staff members, some senators refer to the Indians of Chiapas as terrorists who are a threat to the security of the Western Hemisphere. Campbell, in this letter, says that U.S. civilians interested in their own safety should stay home and leave it to the U.S. government to deal with, quote, Mexico's culture of impunity at the appropriate levels and at the appropriate time, end quote. What does Washington consider appropriate? Well, these tanks and guns are from the United States. I asked Comandante David of the Zapatista National Liberation Army about allegations that the United States, with the assistance of Argentina and Guatemala, is recruiting and training peasants as contras to attack indigenous villages.
Pero también pues ya están pagados, ya están orientados, están entrenados, están dirigidos por el gobierno mexicano, por el gobierno pues de cada país. Pero también tienen asesores, pues, asesores norteamericanos, ¿sí? Porque dicen que los militares norteamericanos tienen mucha experiencia, tienen mucha forma de cómo entrenar pues a los contrarrevolucionarios. Entrenan pues como torturar, como asesinar y como atacar. Dicen que por eso ellos están entrenados contra la guerrilla, dice pues, entonces la contrainsurgencia. Entonces sabemos que existe eso pues. Por eso no lo dudamos que existan grupos por todos lados, en todos los países de América. Y también pues no lo dudamos que en México también están. Porque hay señales claros pues. El ejército mexicano también tienen asesores militares norteamericanos. Y por todos lados pues hay asesores militares norteamericanos. Entonces están enseñando al gobierno mexicano también pues cómo son las tácticas antiguerrilleras. Entonces es lo que están enseñando. Y sí lo sabemos.
Students blocking Chinese tanks in Tiananmen Square received a flood of U.S. press coverage. But apparently, indigenous people blocking U.S. tanks in Mexico don't count to the U.S. media or the U.S. government. We asked Zapatista Major Ana Maria if she had a message for the women of the United States.
Nos apoyen denunciando también al gobierno mexicano. Lo que está haciendo, por ejemplo, ahorita lo que está haciendo pues es que está hablando de paz, pero la verdad está mandando a sus soldados, apuntándonos pues con sus cañones y todo eso. Entonces en eso pues sí necesitamos que tengamos ese apoyo a nivel internacional también, a nivel nacional, y que se vea pues la verdad, ¿no?, de lo que está pasando y no las mentiras, pues lo que dice el gobierno, ¿no? Y en eso sí, pues sí les hacemos un llamado, ¿no?, a las mujeres, a todas las mujeres del mundo y de nuestro país aquí en México, ¿no?, que pues que nos apoyen en eso, haciendo esas denuncias, porque pues...
In July of 1994, the Zapatistas constructed a symbol of hope for the indigenous people deep in the Lacandon jungle and named it Aguas Calientes. In August of 1994, 6,000 members of the civil population came to plan democratic reforms for Mexico. On December 31st, 1994, the Zapatistas celebrated the first anniversary of their uprising. In February 1995, apparently on orders from Wall Street, Chase Manhattan Bank, and Bill Clinton, the Mexican government broke its truce with the Zapatistas and sent in the army. This is what now remains of Aguas Calientes. No matter, for this year's second anniversary of the uprising, 4 new Aguas Calientes have sprung up in the jungle and in the highlands of Chiapas.
Pues vamos a hacer la fiesta porque son días festivos para nosotros. Y precisamente pues el gobierno pues nos amenaza porque no quiere, no va a permitir de que recordemos pues nuestros compañeros caídos desde el 1 de enero, de que nosotros celebremos nuestra fiesta, la fiesta de los zapatistas, la fiesta de todos. El gobierno va a tratar de obstaculizar pues como dé lugar, pero no lo va a poder. Ante sus soldados, ante sus cañones, vamos a celebrar nuestra fiesta, la fiesta de todos.
Nosotros nacimos de la noche, en ella vivimos, moriremos en ella, pero la luz será mañana para los más, para todos aquellos que hoy lloran la noche, para quienes se niega el día, para quienes es regalo la muerte, para quienes está prohibido la vida, para todos la luz, para todos todo, para nosotros el dolor y la angustia, para nosotros la alegre rebeldía, para nosotros el futuro negado, para nosotros la dignidad insurrecta, para nosotros nada.
Hugo returned to his studies in the United States. I went to a village to ask about coffee, and when I left, I was stopped at an immigration checkpoint. A truckload of armed men were called to guard me. This, coincidentally, is the same day I had predicted that something would happen to me, to my lawyer back in Denver.
¿Por qué tengo que ir?
Es para regularizar su situación migratoria. Sí. A ver.
¿Es legal para
sí,
viajar aquí?
Sí.
¿Hay problemas?
I was told that I wouldn't leave that spot until I signed an order to appear at immigration in San Cristobal de las Casas. I knew what was coming because Mexico had already been expelling foreigners who had contact with the indigenous in Chiapas. My lawyer informed me that, although I hadn't broken any laws, I would almost certainly be expelled permanently from Mexico. We decided to fight this act of intimidation anyway, with the hope that, even if I was expelled, the resulting publicity might help protect other travelers. Thus began a series of events that included a 14-and-a-half-hour interrogation, the strange antics of the immigration officer, Maura Bravo Hernandez, who alternately tried waving her gun, seductive tactics, threats, lies, psychological games, and intimidation in order to get information out of me, and my refusal to give information the Mexican government might use against their own people. Meanwhile, in spite of the efforts of the United States and Mexico to terrorize and starve them into submission, Zapatistas met with indigenous representatives from Mexico and other countries in San Cristobal de las Casas and came up with 6 platforms that represent their demands to the government. They include indigenous rights in general, indigenous women's and children's rights, autonomy, access to means of communication, democratic reforms and indigenous political participation, and the restoration of indigenous communal land and mineral rights that the government had given away for NAFTA.
Entonces había un derecho para los campesinos de tener su tierra, de trabajar su tierra, sin que nadie los explote. Y esa ley, pues es precisamente el gobierno lo ha querido acabar, lo ha querido pues reformar y lo ha hecho, pues. Por ejemplo, el artículo 27, pues hace poco pues trató de acabarlo todo, porque traía el espíritu pues de repartición de tierras pues en tiempo de revolución, en tiempo de Zapata. Pero para acabar de aplastar, de acabar el espíritu revolucionario de Zapata, por eso el gobierno mexicano pues trató de cambiar la ley, de reformar el artículo 27, por el cual nosotros los campesinos no estamos de acuerdo en eso, porque nos quita todo el derecho como campesino de trabajar nuestra tierra, de usar pues nuestra tierra como nosotros nos convenga, nos quita todo el derecho.
Senator Ben Nighthorse Campbell's office manager told me recently, in regard to human rights in Mexico, "Don't worry, capitalism will turn this whole situation around in 20 years. I told her that 20 years was not acceptable. In 20 years, the culture, language, customs, and communities of the indigenous would be lost throughout the Americas, and what we were going to replace that with was not worth the loss. In spite of what Ben Nighthorse Campbell says, it's the governments that should stay out of it, and it's the civil population that should repair their damage."
Techo, tierra, trabajo, pan, salud, educación, independencia, democracia, libertad, justicia y paz. Estas fueron nuestras banderas en la madrugada de 1994. Nuestra sangre y la palabra nuestra encendieron un fuego pequeñito en la montaña y lo caminamos rumbo a la casa del poder y del dinero. Hay muchas luces y todas son primeras. Quiere el soberbio apagar una rebeldía que su ignorancia ubica en el amanecer de 1994. Pero la rebeldía que hoy tiene rostro moreno y lengua verdadera no se nació ahora. Antes habló con otras lenguas y en otras tierras. En muchas montañas y muchas historias ha caminado la rebeldía contra la injusticia. Ha hablado ya en lengua náhuatl, paipai, quiligua, júcapa, cochimí, cumiay, yuma, seri, chontal, chinanteco, pame, chichimeca, otomí, mazahua, matlacinca, ocuiteco, zapoteco, solteco, chatino, papabuco, mixteco, cuicateco, triqui, amuzgo, mazateco.